Angedacht von 19:15 Uhr bis ca. 20 Uhr ist der Simon Binder. Ich weiß, er ist auch schon bei uns. Freue mich sehr auf seinen Vortrag. Simon, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Perfect, great.
Thank you.
So, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we'll take care of that. First and foremost, thank you so much for allowing me to visit your user group. I would have loved to be in Germany and visit you there, but at some point I hopefully will be able to get back there. As Patrick knows, my father is actually from Austria, but please don't test my German. I wish it was better than it is. But I found it really interesting to listen to what Patrick is talking about, since I am able to pick up bits and pieces here and there and then puzzle that together with the German I know. So I see this as practice as well. And I'm really happy to see that you have been able to grow such a great community here for WVD, and I hope that that will continue. So today I'm here to talk about how to secure a Windows Virtual Desktop and really talk about how to do that from the inside and out. Because looking at the situation we are in now with COVID, I see that Windows Virtual Desktop, and I'm sure you're aware of it, have had a tremendous growth. I remember when I spoke to the product group in January, February, or something like that, and they were like optimistic for, yeah, this will be a good year, but this will probably be the year of Teams, and next year will be the year of Windows Virtual Desktop. But then they had an absolutely astonishing growth, and they managed to handle that just brilliantly together with their partners and their customers, and probably many of you. But what I see is that we, by doing all of these implementations at haste, possibly forgot the weakest link in the chain. I see that many organizations had to move to Windows Virtual Desktop and had to do it really fast. And therefore, we have also seen that many organizations forgot to secure all the aspects of it. And that's what we're working on now, to ensure that whatever were implemented as part of that first push towards WVD actually is secure as well, so that you may be able to continue using WVD to the same or less or more extent post-COVID as well. So we'll start about talking about the different links in the chain of Windows Virtual Desktop and where you need to focus in terms of security. And then we'll go into the demo section where I'll be spending quite a lot of time looking at these different aspects. And some of these things may be more related to other services than WVD, but that's what I really like about the service. That's what I always have enjoyed with the service. I've been fortunate enough to be a part of the WVD journey since beginning or end of October, beginning of November 2018. So just after the announcement, I was onboarded to the private preview because of the very reason that I work with the Windows client, the physical clients, and the product groups wanted to learn a lot about how to manage these Windows operating systems when they were deployed at scale as virtual machines. And I had one product group meeting where I was invited by one person, but it ended up being joined by 6 different product groups because everyone wanted a piece of WVD. And I see that my strongest point when it comes to WVD is connecting the dots. And I may not be the absolute best EUC specialist, but I know some things about WVD, which I will share today. I know some things about security, some things about Windows management, some things about the workplace as a whole. And when we gather them, we can create a good user experience and a secure user experience. And we really need to put Windows Virtual Desktop into context. What are we using it for? Just we like, I find it quite cool to have thousands of virtual machines running and being able to scale them up and down and really make the most out of the technology we have available. But we need to also remember, how can we actually use it? And when we use it for particular reasons, how do we need to secure that? Before I introduce myself properly, I just want to give you a heads up. We're renovating the house, so it's an absolute mess. I got internet back 2 minutes before joining this meeting, and I haven't said goodnight to my daughter yet, so she may be running in at some point, and I will just say goodnight to her, and then we'll get back on track. But just as you know, she's kind. She tries to speak German as well. It's entertaining, so we'll see. But who am I then? I obviously have a daughter. She's 3.5. Brilliant kid. She deployed her first Windows machine 8 months old, and she loves my Eagle Hedgehog. So she's definitely a geek from the start. But my name is Simon. I work as a principal technical architect at Trusec in Sweden. Trusec is a Swedish-founded company. We are about 14 years old today and employs around 130 people. We are considered to be one of the world's leading experts when it comes to cybersecurity, and we work across the cybersecurity spectra, where I focus on the infrastructure part. So digital workplace or secure workplace in this case. We have a cybersecurity team, which do red teaming, penetration testing, things like that. A secure development department, and we also do incident response. And that's when everything have gone the wrong way. And that's where I've found many of my learnings as well. So many of the things I've learned doing incident response at scale are things that I can add to my knowledge about the secure workplace and also to this session. I'm a Microsoft MVP in endpoint management, so enterprise mobility, but I focus on Microsoft Endpoint Manager especially, but I work across the entire Microsoft 365 space as well as WVD. I've spoken at a number of different conferences over the years. I've founded 2 user groups, and I'm also part of what you can see in the top corner here of Knee Deep in Tech, which is a podcast, a blog, and a lot of other craziness. But I encourage you to listen into that. So that's who I am. And we will have time for questions later on, since my setup isn't exactly as I would have liked it to be. I can't see the chat window currently. So I've summarized the questions, and if you at any point really need to ask a question, please feel free to go off mute and ask it away. If you want to ask it in German, that should be fine. I'll try to figure it out, and otherwise I believe Patrick would be kind enough to translate it. So feel free to ask questions at any point, but I will have some time in the end for questions before I summarize. I think we all have heard about the weakest link. And of course, you will get the slides. And I always say like this, there are never any slides I can't share, but there are never any slides that you will have any use of. Yeah, I may add links to the show notes, but the slides is really more there to ensure that the message comes through more than being a documentation, but you're more than welcome to have the slides. So what we see is that you can secure an environment to an amazing extent. You can invest a lot of money in networking, in EDR, in doing every single possible thing to secure your environment. But it's enough that one link in this security chain is weak or weakened, and that will definitely be where the attacker hits. So it's always about finding that weakest link and be able to mend that as soon as possible. And for WVD, I think it's important to remember that we have so many different technologies involved in WVD. We'll go through them all, from the connection to the actual service, to the Windows operating system, and to the networking behind that. But WVD have so many moving parts, which I find intriguing and really powerful, that you can build such complex and awesome solutions. But that also means that you need to combine a bunch of different knowledges, experiences, and skills to make it really secure. And we'll get back to that in the end of the session. But what we see is that in many cases, it's those things that we don't think about that we will end up having a problem with, where we don't realize that, yeah, but the users aren't local admins, but they may be authenticating to something that are. We may have some accounts that are more sensitive than others. Just give me a second. So sorry about that. We have all of these weak points. And I know for a fact that it's enough with one single account that aren't protected by MFA or protected with a strong password to take down an entire environment. I worked with one incident just when I started at TrueSec. It's actually a reference case, and that's quite extraordinary, actually, that a company felt that they needed to go out to the market and say, this happened to us, learn from it. And at that point, they had one compromised account to start with, and that took down a 1 billion euro business for 6 weeks. And during that time, we worked 20 people 24/7 to rebuild them. One single account. And that's what we usually see, that if you have one weak link, we need to mend that. And for WVD, we may need to have different people looking at each link. So we will go through the connection to WVD and how we can secure that with especially conditional access, but also MFA and such. We'll look into the Windows operating system and how we can secure that from a WVD perspective, and what we need to think about, what's different with WVD in contrast to a physical machine, and what is really this Windows 10 multi-session, which Microsoft have claimed since the start that this is just Windows 10, nothing to worry about, and I will prove to you that it's not Windows 10. We'll then look into the actual service, what we can do with that, how we can configure that to be more secure, and we'll then finally look at the networking aspects of it. And there may be a lot of other moving parts like the AD as such, the file shares, whatnot, but these are the main points of interest that we need to secure. This is a castle in Wales, if I'm not remembering wrongly. And I've always been fascinated by castles. And today we're looking into these different fortifications and see how we need to protect the core. WVD is still quite far away in many cases from the core of our infrastructure. We should be able to survive an attack against one of our VMs. We should be able to survive a malware infecting one of our VMs. But that's just one part of the chain, and we need to set up these new walls with regular intervals so that we can be certain that, yeah, even if someone get access, which we will show now how you can protect, they shouldn't get further into your environment than what a normal user should be, and with the maximum same permissions as a regular user would have. So let's start with that, and we'll head into demos. And I'll just take a look in the chat so that everyone can see all right. So we will start here. This is, as you may have seen 1,000 times, the web interface for WVD, and this is the VM that I will be securing today. But the first thing we need to do when we actually connect is, of course, authenticate. And today, and I believe that Microsoft have done a fairly good job in educating users with this, and admins especially with this, that we need to protect authentication. But I still see that there are organizations that lack the knowledge on how to do it properly. So in our case, I'm now opening up a new in private tab and sign in. And as you can see, nothing happened here. It worked just fine. No multi-factor authentication, nothing. And this is, in all fairness, a very weak point of authentication. And now I'm here. I have the possibility to, from here, jump the next step into my VMs. So from that point of view, and as you are aware of, I'm sure, I will, if I click this desktop or any of the apps, if that's my first session on that host, get another prompt of authentication. So I have like the lack of proper single sign-on without ADFS actually can be seen as a good thing as well. But this, in my opinion, is not a situation we want to be in. So we will head into, where is my browser? There we go. We'll head into, first and foremost, endpoint.microsoft.com. And every single organization that runs Azure AD are today able to use multi-factor authentication for free. That's now included in the free Azure AD SKU. The limitation of that is that we can only then apply it to all users for all cloud apps, and we'll always get a new prompt for every single authentication we do, but it's at least something. The better option, in my opinion, is to use conditional access. I encourage you not to use the MFA server if you're still using that, and we can talk about why later on. But if you have the possibility to use conditional access, definitely use conditional access. And conditional access is something we configure through Azure AD, or in my case, Microsoft Intune. It's really a bit unclear of who owns it. I'm not even sure if who actually owns the feature, but Intune talks about it most, I would say. So I have a number of rules here. And as you can see, first and foremost here, I actually have two currently. So I have one rule for Windows Virtual Desktop Classic and one for Windows Virtual Desktop Resource Manager. And if we just take a look at the Classic one first, in here, to make this work, to enable multi-factor authentication through conditional access for the Classic, we need to have these two apps, which are available in all Azure AD tenants, which runs what WVD, in the rule and apply the rules to that. And you just search for WVD or Windows Virtual Desktop, you will find both of them. We should at some point get two apps in the ARM version as well, or at least they've said so, but it works just fine with this app as well. So this is what we had for the new, the current WVD infrastructure. So we had that. We filter that based on which users should be prompted, and or which users should really have this rule applied to them. And do remember that this is for users, regardless of which device they log on to, and we'll look at the devices later on. So you select which users, and that could, of course, be connected to one of your groups that you use for application pool assignment or such. In this case, apps, we can then select the number of conditions based on how the user authenticates to this machine. And here you can be really flexible and really target the scenarios you're after in terms of ensuring this highest level of security, independent on where in the world the user logs on from. And we can talk about this, like when I do courses on Microsoft Intune, I spend at least half a day on conditional access because that's the core feature, I would say. That's what everything is about, really. But I would like to point out this, which is the device platforms. These are the supported platforms. Yeah, I know Windows Phone is there. More people should run Windows phones, but that's how it is. So we have Android, iOS, Windows, Mac OS, and so on. And we can therefore have different rules for these platforms. But I would like to emphasize one thing. I know that tomorrow there's one of my absolute favorite conferences going on. So it's the Agile Disrupt. If you haven't signed up, I'm sure that's possible to do. And I know that Patrick's speaking there. So definitely check out his session, which will be in German and English, if I'm not mistaken, or at least German. And how do we apply conditional access rules to a thin client like an Agile client? It's not here. And if we want to specifically target Linux, we can actually sort of do that. Because if I select any device here, it will be any device. From whichever device I authenticate, I will get the same rules applied. But not all of these rules are applicable to Linux, since it's not a supported platform currently, I may add. So to enable this to only actually apply on Linux, so if I want to ensure that every time I sign in from something other than these platforms, which in most cases will be a Linux client, and that is on a specific network, I shouldn't be forced to do an MFA prompt. So what I need to do is that I include any device. Here's the kicker. I exclude all devices, all or supported devices. Because this will now mean that any device but the supported devices will get a certain policy applied to them. But to show how this works in practice, I'll move these away and ensure that my user is targeted. I can select a number of different things here. That what I tend to use the most with WVD is location and platform, basically. But you can configure that however you like. And we then require multi-factor authentication, but I can also combine a number of these controls. And I turn that one on. And this hits instantly. So we will take another window. And hopefully we will see this working. Wonder why. Could be that I have authenticated previously. Let's take a look at it. What did go wrong? Correct one. Desktop. Yeah. Any device. Do like that instead. Now, sorry about that. But I've heard that this is why people prefer to have live demos instead of recorded demos, because people want to see the presenters fail and then troubleshoot it live and hopefully finish the session on time. Now I did have another session open. Let's try again. And I would like to add that you should have received a multi-factor authentication. I'm sorry about that. I'll have to troubleshoot it and get back to it later on. Let's see. Take one more look and see what's going on. That's the correct one. That's the correct one. Yeah, it's good if I don't exclude the account. So third time's the charm. And you can, of course, also sign in to the service passwordless if you prefer to use your phone or a hardware token or anything like that. That's to the service. We can't use that for the actual RDP connection later on. That's due to the Rdp protocol, and I've heard the PMs of passwordless talk about the protocol, the Rdp protocol from a multi-factor authentication point of view, and I really don't see that happening anytime soon, at least. And I think I've just reinstalled my phone as well, so I'm not able to answer it. So we'll remove that again. But that's what happens, and you can then add a number of different controls to this as well. So that's the actual connection, and do ensure to implement a secure connection to WVD, because once you're in your VM, you're in your environment, and we will now look at how you can then protect the environment you're in. So that's the protection. For our actual VMs, now I close down that one. We need to look at them as any physical machine. We can't just, the same way as we used to with non-persistent machines, say that, yeah, but we'll just shut it down and spin up new ones. And we can do that. But that's a very dangerous way of thinking in terms of security, because you can't shut it down. You can't find the threat if you don't look for it. And I can tell you that when we talk about attacks, seconds matter. And the vulnerability that were released Tuesday for domain controllers. And if you haven't patched your domain controllers with the latest cumulative update, you really should. That attack takes less than a minute to execute for anyone really that wants to attack you. So we need to be really, really fast. And to be able to be really, really fast in terms of finding threats, so finding attacks, I tend to say that we can't do that without an EDR. And I prefer, and that's definitely not any kind of secret, I definitely prefer Microsoft Defender ATP for the simplicity of deploying it, for the performance and for the pace which it develops. And that's fully supported today for WVD. So we can use Microsoft Defender ATP for our session hosts. There are a few caveats. It's fully supported on so dedicated machines. If you have one user on one machine, that's fully supported. I think it's officially is in preview for multi-session machines. And there you also have a limitation of a maximum of 25 users per machine for it to be supported. I think they're slightly struggling with being able to keep up with everything that happens when you're more than one user on a multi-session host. But that's what we have from a Microsoft Defender point of view, ATP that is. And if you haven't looked into it, we'll just take a look here. I really encourage you to do so. I know that there may be challenges with how much data is actually gathered from these machines. Where is it stored? I encourage you to look into it from a functionality point of view and then look into it from a legal point of view, because I know that it's challenging for everyone. And I'm currently helping a few Swedish customers to evaluate if this even is possible for them to run. But it's a really powerful tool, and I highly encourage you to look into it. And it does today support most of the operating systems out there. So I actually have my host here. And we can see that we have logged on users, which is the most frequent, least frequent. I can see a security assessment of that particular machine, what needs to be taken care of. And I can look in the timeline to see everything that goes on. So every single thing that happens on this machine is being logged. So ensure to protect your virtual machines the same way as you're protecting your physical machines, because it's really just still a virtual machine or just a Windows machine. I'm managing my machine with, in this case, both Microsoft Endpoint Manager and Microsoft Intune. So what's called co-management. That's fully supported for, again, with Intune, it's fully supported to do that for dedicated machines, so one-to-one relationships. It's challenging with multi-session, but Config Manager works just brilliantly. And that's how you can ensure to keep up to date and follow the same patch pace. And we can talk about patching of WVD for ages. There are so many different ways to do it. And I usually tell my customers that there are a lot of right ways, but there are usually only one right way for you. If you are really skilled at Config Manager, you can do patching of WVD with Config Manager. You will incur a cost for the time the machine is running while patching. So take that into consideration. And I think in the long run, we will see that we only make new images frequently with Image Builder or with any of the community tools out there to keep up to date. We also have the possibility to include a number of different security features in the virtual machine. That's the cool thing about this running on Azure, that we can actually support a number of different things. I would like to point out one thing which has become very apparent now, and that is that we use more data than ever. We publish more data than ever to our machines and to our virtual machines, and we may not be in full control of those operating systems. This isn't really a Windows Virtual Desktop feature, which I'm going to show you now, but it's a Windows feature, and I find it really useful for allowing your users to get, allowing your users to use their virtual machines the same way as they have been using their physical machines if you allow them to. So as you can see, or I hope you can see, in the URL up here, I have a small briefcase. I also, if I take a look at my task manager under details, and I need to add this column, enterprise context, I have personal, and I have my domain. This means that we now are able to differentiate your apps from personal apps, your URLs from personal URLs. And we can also, if we look into the files, text document here, and you see that I have the small briefcase. For the sake of this demo, I will create another one. And this can, in practice, be any document. Over here, I have a personal OneDrive. So this isn't a OneDrive for business. This is the regular consumer OneDrive. And if I take my personal file, pull that down to my OneDrive, that worked just fine. If I take the other one, it will actually prompt me, and I can block this fully. But in this case, it's saying that you're now doing something that you aren't allowed to do. You can't move this work-related file to a non-work-related storage location. You are, in this case, able to do that, but it will be logged, and we will get insight in exactly what you have done, who did it, and at what point. So I'm able to either skip, which will leave it where it is, or continue with that. And you can do changing of these. You can allow that or disallow it. So you can do that automatically or manually, or you can do it automatically, and therefore ensure that whatever gets into your Windows Virtual Desktop machine, regardless how, you can protect your internal systems and your from getting personal data, and you can protect your data from reaching external systems. And this, of course, works across any Windows device. We should also take a look at what I stated previously about this not being Windows 10. And there are a number of different ways to see that. But in this log from Microsoft Endpoint Manager, we should be able to see it. There we go. Multi-user terminal server. There's also another, I think that were actually an old error message which stated this is not a workstation in the logs. So regardless of what Microsoft tells you, this is really Windows Server with a bunch of Windows 10 on it. And that's something you need to consider when you manage this with any management tool of your choice. So protect your Windows environment inside of your virtual hosts. So we have now looked at the connection. We have looked at some parts of the securing of the actual VM. For the service, I know that Patrick mentioned Marcel, and I think I saw him joining. And the RBAC part of WVD, that's something I also encourage you to look into. The role-based access control of Windows Virtual Desktop, so that you can protect your machines from your admins so that they don't do things by mistake, or if you have an attacker that takes down your environment. Ensure to implement RBAC at a very early stage. And that goes for the entire Azure infrastructure. The sooner or the earlier you implement role-based access control, and to be honest, it applies to anything, the earlier in the process you implement RBAC, the easier it will be. But you will also get a lot of benefits from that because you minimize mistakes and you make your admins in many cases feel more comfortable because they know that they can't mess anything up, which happens anyways, but that's how it is. Let's head into the WVD service, and again, to talk about the protection of information inside of your virtual machines. If you haven't noticed, you're actually able to do, you can do a lot of different settings with group policy, desired state configuration, configuration items in config manager, whatnot, in terms of how you allow the session to work. But in your properties, for every host pool, you also have the Rdp properties. And this is the exact same thing as you would be configuring if you had an Rdp file, really. So this is where you, per host pool, can configure if you're allowed to copy and paste between your host and your virtual machine. Or in this case, I've disallowed clipboard and the redirection of printers to ensure that nothing, at least from these point of views, can't leak out of my virtual machine. So consider which kind of data will be in your virtual machine, which kind of data will the users have access to, and is there a risk that that will leak outside of your environment? And I'm happy to provide you with the reference for which settings are available. And then it's entirely up to you. And I think that's also a very important thing to remember. It's entirely up to you which way you decide to configure it. If you're a small Windows Virtual Desktop environment, like with 1 or 3 or 4 VMs, you don't need to put that much effort down into managing the same, like if they were 1,000 machines. So use the tool and technique that is most applicable to you. But definitely look into this and ensure that you feel safe in allowing your users to use those virtual machines. Because the more they are used, the more value out of your money you will be getting. So that was a brief look into the service. We have looked into the VM. We have looked into the connection to it. And now probably the hardest thing in Azure, at least that's my view, and that's networking. And I know that many of you probably have friends at Microsoft that you can ask about this. But when you talk to customer engineers, when you talk to program managers and such, and ask them what is the thing that most organizations mess up when they move to the cloud, that's networking. And it scares me actually sometimes, like what you can do and how everything works together. But I would like to show you two things. One thing that I have failed miserably with, and one thing that works, hopefully, today. So when you have your virtual machine, you have connected to it, and that's the beauty of the security of the service, that you can protect this VM from a networking point of view. You don't have any inbound connections and such. But then it's up to you to decide what should this VM be able to reach. That's and the thinking about that is the same thinking as why myself and my company discourage the use of VPN in all instances. If you have any other option than VPN, use that. The reason for that isn't that the VPN as such is insecure, but what we see it terminating in that in many cases you are allowing that full path into your environment. But WVD provides you with the same thing if you configure your site-to-site VPN or express route in that way. So with network security groups, you are able to configure what kind of network traffic should be allowed to travel between different parts of your virtual network infrastructure inside of Azure. And to show you one thing that you could do with it, I have in my VM somewhere a file share. Don't do it like this. This is a very old environment, so please don't do it like this. So in this case, I have a file share, but for whatever reason, I don't want my users to have access to this particular file share. So by using network security groups, I now have a very simple rule. You should be doing this in a much more intelligent way, but for the sake of the demo, it's very simple. I have a source IP, which is the IP of my VM, and I have a destination IP. And I've now just configured it to block any port. So all traffic between these two should now be blocked. And just to show that I'm fully able to browse around here. And I save that. So it's updating the security rule. And you can do days on how to configure network security groups. But to differentiate this from the last part that I will show, this is to protect especially the movement of data across your virtual networks, your virtual machines, and from your virtual networks to your on-prem environment. So see this as an inside protection foremost, even if you can use it in other ways as well. So we should soon, hopefully, see that this connection is no longer available. Come on. Or at least it should have. It's not my day today. See if I can troubleshoot that as swiftly as I did with the other one. Could be slow. No. So we'll see if that works out later on. But the thinking is that you can then configure which machines should have access to which other machines and which other services, and limit the connection for each VM, for each service, for each app group in any way you prefer to the different parts of your environment. If you want to do the same thing in terms of external network traffic, you could look into Azure Firewall, which is something that I honestly haven't used that much, but I see it having a huge impact on how we'll view Windows Virtual Desktop and the connection from them and the security around them in the future as well. I think it was released for WVD in May or so, and it's actually one of the very few, or WVD as such is one of the few solutions which have ready-made FQDN tags. However, they lack some functionality. But this is where you will be able later on to have fully working tags, so you don't need to have control of all of these URLs as an example. And what can you then do with this? Well, the basic things you can do is application rules collection. So we can go back to that one actually. So in this way, you route the traffic through your firewall, and it works just as any firewall. This is just the Azure equivalent. You can use any kind of firewall in Azure, or for the matter, a physical firewall if you like to. And here we can use FQDNs, FQDN tags to filter what you're able to access from your virtual machine or that subnet, and therefore limit the access outbound from the VM, which I find really, really cool. There are other ways of doing this, but if you are used to managing firewalls, then this is definitely something you should be looking into. So there we have the connection to the service. We have a couple of failed demos. Sorry for that. Let's see, one more try. No, let's see why that happened. We have looked into the connection, the VM, the service, and the networking, and you need to configure them all to work and to be really secure. If you have one weak link, that's definitely where either your data will be exfiltrated or where you will have an attacker coming into your environment. So therefore, it's all about context. You need to consider what is the purpose of every single VM you have and how can I protect them? And once you do that, you can talk to your teammates, your networking people, your Windows management people, your virtualization specialist, whatever they may be, and say that this is the purpose of my VM or for my host pool. How can we protect that appropriately? I will actually do so that I will summarize and then I'll open up for questions. I think it will only be a quite interesting gap otherwise. So if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat now or wait until after my summary. think of security as this onion. If you have seen Shrek, and I believe it's translated in the same way in German as well, security is all about onions. The more layers you can put onto your security posture, the better. But you also need to consider zero trust. And this is where I hope that we'll see a really interesting partnership between the different product groups, where not even our virtual machines in Azure are secure by default. That's where I hope that we will see full conditional access support for multi-session environments. So where every user as such in any session they have on a VM is evaluated from a conditional access point of view and is given different access rules from the same machine. Don't trust a VM just because it's in Azure. Don't trust it just because you have configured it in one way. Don't even trust it because you installed it this morning. I can tell you a quite interesting story about Walmart later on, where they managed to re-image 100,000 cashier machines with a malware-infected image, and they didn't notice until months later. So always consider zero trust, but before you get into there, you should have multiple layers of security, both inside and out. And see this as a collaboration. You need to collaborate across different competencies because no one can know it all. But once we have all this, once we have our guards, we have our gates, we have everything that will protect ourselves, hopefully the user will be able to access the virtual machine and get access to what really matters, the data inside of it, the ability to do their job, and the way you can really give value to your colleagues. So all of these security features is in the end only there to ensure that you can get the most out of the service. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions. If you come up with questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out in any way you like, email, Twitter, blog, or listen on our podcast on Spotify or any other podcasting platform. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll now head over to questions, and Patrick, feel free to interrupt me if it goes over time.
So first of all, Simon, thank you very much for your session. It was very interesting, a lot of demonstration. From my side, I really appreciate and I really like all your effort for this evening. So thank you very much for this. And yes, as you already said, if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat. We can answer it. Yes, we still have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you like, you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you like.
And we can start with Nicholas. Is it true that the new Azure Firewall can be managed through a checkpoint control plane? I'm not sure, really. I know that there are checkpoint firewalls inside of Azure if you would like to use that, but the APIs should be available for anything. I don't know if Patrick or any other have any insight on that, but I'm happy to look it up otherwise. And then we have a follow-up there as well. It's hard to implement new stuff. It's SecOff is specialized into a specific product. Yeah, and definitely so. From the real world, I'm currently working with a medium-sized organization in Sweden, which have some quite interesting security challenges. And they are currently implementing a SOC without talking to anyone, a super secure network without talking to anyone else. I'm implementing Microsoft Defender ATP, or am about to implement that, and no one talks to me. And then they have a number of other ways of securing their environment, and no one talks to one another, which will, in the end, cost them a lot of money. So that's really what I'm doing now to break that free. It's not about saying my product is better. It's about saying how can we work together to fix the best possible security. And that's really where I find that WVD also can help us from that perspective. But I'll look up the checkpoint part, because that would actually be quite interesting for me personally as well. And I think I can understand the first question. If a Windows Virtual Desktop multi-session image can be managed by Intune. And it's quite interesting actually, because it's absolutely possible. I've done that plenty of times. It's just that it's not supported to do that if you have more than one user logged on to it. So you can manage the operating system as such, because that doesn't require you to do Azure AD join, but you will have a very limited use set. So I would say that engine management of WVD is something I really am pushing hard to get, because I believe that that would help a lot of smaller organizations. But currently you need to really consider how you use it. However, co-management works great. So if you have Intune and you have Config Manager, use them both to get the most value into your VM. But it's not officially supported to do it with more than one user logged on. You can try it, and if you limit the things that are applied to a user, it should, in theory, work. But as soon as you go into like conditional access, it will be a mess for it to figure out what's compliant and what's not.